Father Mike Schmitz is a Catholic priest and director of youth and young adult ministries in the Diocese of Duluth, Minnesota, as well as a Catholic speaker and author. He is known for his internet presence, especially his YouTube videos. Since 2015, Father Mike has been the primary personality involved in Ascension Presents, with free videos offering Catholic perspectives on cultural, societal issues. In January 2021, Father Mike and Ascension launched a new podcast, The Bible in a Year, which consists of 365 episodes over which Father Mike reads the entire Bible, plus provides prayer and commentary every day. It became so successful that it actually was #1 on the Apple Podcast charts for a time. So help me welcome Father Mike Schmitz.
Thanks, you guys. So I know that two quick things before we get started. One is I know that Father Cheney, when he got up, he told that great Ole and Lena joke, and I'm afraid that I don't have a joke. I have sad news. My news is that a couple nights ago, someone broke into our Newman house, and they stole my limbo stick. I mean, how low can you go? And then, no, you guys. And then they actually went into the garage and they stole a case of Red Bull. I don't know how those people sleep at night. So so Brian had mentioned, I actually literally have never been introduced before as an author. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I've written a couple books. That's neat. My bishop, he wanted to know we have a new bishop. He's a year and a half old for us, or 2 years old, whatever. I don't know how old he is. But he asked me, he wanted to know my skills, and he asked me if I was any good at PowerPoint. I said, actually, Bishop, I excel at it. And he kind of had this look, and he's like, is that a Microsoft Office joke? I said, word. And then he looked at me and he said, Father Schmitz, sarcasm will get you nowhere in life. And I said, actually, Bishop, it got me to the World Sarcasm Championships in Tokyo, Japan back in 2009. And he said, really? I was like, no. So that's all my jokes, Father Cheney. That's all. He has Ole and Lena. I have dad jokes. Thank you. So the second thing, is just what an incredible opportunity to be here in, I was going to say Bismarck. It is so great to be in Grand Forks, North Dakota. The Fighting Sioux are not the team we're cheering for. Listen, I know the story. You guys, I know that we have Lauren Hopke works for us. She's been working for us for the last 6 years, 4 years as a focus missionary, and then she's too good because she's from NDSU. And so we had to hire her on campus at UMD. And oh man, go Bison all the way. Every day, every night. She's been with us at UMD a time and a half longer than she was at NDSU. And I can't even joke. About Grand Forks. I can't even joke about the Fighting Sioux. She's like, no, it's go Bison. I'm like, okay, fine. So I get it. That was just my little jab at my NDSU friends. This is still not the talk, you guys. We're gonna get there. But before that, truly, it is an honor to be able to be here. What St. Paul's is at NDSU is nothing short of remarkable. Last year, a year ago, Brian gave us a tour of what the Newman Center was a year ago, and it completely blew my mind. Not just the structure. The structure is amazing. The building is incredible. But he was showing us, and here's this ministry, and here's this ministry. And as we heard earlier tonight, just the ways in which people's lives are being transformed and changed. For that fact that you're a part of this is incredible. Because it's not just the focus missionaries, and not just the peer ministers, and not just the staff, not just Father Cheney or Monsignor. It's the fact that you're a part of this ministry. I don't know if you realize that, but you probably do realize this. But the fact that you're in this room means you're part of this ministry that is changing people's lives. And the fact that you decided on a Thursday night to come to Delta and be part of this evening is, I can't begin to thank you enough. I realize every person here has a busy life. Every person here you have a dozen or 2 dozen other places you could be tonight. But you're here, and I just can't go any further without just thanking you. So thank you. Question. This isn't a joke. This is a real thing. We're getting to the serious part of the night, you guys. So question. Okay, what do the following movies have in common? You ready? What do the following movies have in common? The Sound of Music, Braveheart, The 300, The Revenant, The Amityville Horror, The Exorcist, The Pursuit of Happiness, and Fargo. What do those movies have in common? Earlier asked Lauren, NDSU grad, current UMD person. She said, they all have actors in them. Yes, that's true, yes. The reality that they all have in common is that they're all, the beginning of every one of these movies, it says the same 5 words, based on a true story. So, which is kind of funny, right? That's a lot of people put that based on a true story because they know it's going to make us more interested in the story. Even though, I mean, you guys, Braveheart, how awesome is that? We know that it's only based on a true story. Yes, there's a guy named William Wallace. Yes, there's Robert the Bruce. Yes, there was a fight between Scotland and England at some point. That's all I know. That's all I care about because I want the movie part of it to be true. I don't care how much of based on a true story it is, but like Sound of Music. We know Maria von Trapp. She was a postulant in a religious community, went to work for the Count or the Duke or whatever he was, and ended up marrying him. They all sang. That was great. I don't know if they actually made clothes out of drapes. That's not because it's only based on a true story. Yes, we know the Battle of Thermopylae, right? The 300 Spartans against King Xerxes, who was attacking. Yes, we know that there was a battle there. I don't know if they all had those sweet beards and oiled up chests. Like, I don't know if only based on a true story. The crazy thing is we realize this, right? We realize this. And when something's based on a true story, it's kind of like, the movie Fargo. Which much of it takes place in my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. It says at the very beginning, this movie, based on true events that happened in Minnesota in 1987. The Coen brothers put that in knowing that none of those things ever happened. They just said it's based on a true story because they knew it would get our attention. This is the crazy thing, is that, the reason I bring this up is because, our most of us, we're basing our lives off of some kind of story. Every one of us is basing our lives off of some kind of story. Basically, every one of us is basing our lives off of, because what's a story? A story is a way of seeing the world. And every one of us is basing the way we see the world off of some kind of story, some kind of tale, some kind of lens, some kind of worldview. The problem is, not all of us are basing our lives off of a true story. In fact, a lot of us are basing our lives off of a false story. And just think about that, especially when it comes to, as Father Cheney mentioned, what is our culture saying? Our culture is saying that here you need to base your life off of a certain narrative. You have to base your life off a certain way of looking at the world where you're number one, where anyone who gets in your way is an obstacle. Anyone who causes you to go out of yourself is someone who's going to take away from you. That it's better to be able to be free to sleep in, eat some Cheetos, and watch reality TV than to get woken up once again at 6 a.m. by those needy kids and have to pour out your heart for them. See, every one of us is basing our lives off of a story. And the question is, am I basing my life off of a false story or am I basing my life off of a true story? And this is nothing new. This in fact, it's so old. In fact, I'll say it like this. Back in the day, in the Roman Empire, there was the Caesar. He had some news. And the news was, he said, I've conquered the known world. We're going to have peace. And it was called, you probably know this already because you guys are smart. It's called the Pax Romana. So here's in fact, he called that news that we had the peace of Rome, the Roman peace. It basically, listen, the whole land, we're now at peace. He called this Greek word, the evangelion. And you might know that some of you are like, I know that word. Okay, nerd. Yes. You know that word, evangelion, Actually, okay, nerds, speak up. What does the word evangelion mean in English? The good news, exactly. We identified them. Get them, boys. Yes, evangelion means the good news. So here Caesar is saying, listen, I've declared the good news. The good news is the Pax Romana. Basically, you have nothing to fear. There's no more battles to fight. We're at peace. That you can base your life off that true story. And then you step back and say, wait, I can base my life off of that true story as long as I'm a Roman citizen, as long as I have land, as long as I have power, as long as I have wealth, as long as I'm a man, as long as I'm an adult. So people that base their lives off of this, what Caesar called the evangelion, this good news. But they base their lives off of a false story. And along comes someone like St. Paul. You know, St. Paul, he knew that what Caesar had declared. Caesar had declared the evangelion. He declared the good news of the Pax Romana. He knew that Caesar declared this. And so when St. Paul goes to the Thessalonians, right, one of the things he says, actually, I declared to you the good news. In fact, okay, we have evangelion, which is what language? Greek. Yeah, good job. And then he translated good news. What's the one word we typically use to describe that term, good news? Starts with a G. Yes, ends with an gospel. Gospel, exactly, yeah. So the gospel. And St. Paul says to the Thessalonians, he says, I proclaim to you the gospel, the good news, the evangelion. But he says, I proclaim to you the good news of God. Not the good news of Caesar. Because if you declare here the gospel of Caesar, if you base your life off that, you're gonna base your life off of a false story. But if you hear and believe in the good news of the gospel of God, and you base your life off this, you'll live a life based on a true story. And what is the gospel of God? Well, when St. Paul goes to Thessalonica in Acts chapter 17, he says he went to the synagogue like he always did, and he began to proclaim to them that it was necessary that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. He is the Messiah. And that it was necessary that he suffered, died, and that he actually rose from the dead. He said, this is the good news. This is the true story that you can base your life on. And it's really interesting. Acts chapter 17 goes on to say that many of the Jews believed in him. And it said even a great number of Gentiles came to believe in the gospel, came to believe in this true story. Now, I don't know if you know, I think this is just, this little history lesson. So if you're Jewish, you're raised with a vision of God, right? If you know the Old Testament, you're raised with a vision of God that's pretty accurate. In fact, I would say it's infallibly accurate because the Bible, Old Testament, is still pretty spot on. But if you're raised a Gentile, if you're raised in the Greco-Roman world, your vision of God, your vision of life, your vision of other people was based off of a false story. There's, in fact, in the early church, there was this book called the Apostolic Traditions. This is the history lesson. There's a book called the Apostolic Traditions. And what in the book, the Apostolic Traditions, one of the things that it indicated was that if you were going to become a Catholic, if you're going to become a Christian, in the first centuries of the church, it was a 3-year process. So I don't know if anyone here has ever gone through RCIA? Yeah, well, people. Anyone here currently in RCIA? How many of y'all's RCIA lasted 3 years? No, we've had students at our campus go through RCIA for 3 years. That's just because they had cold feet. But this was the standard practice. You wouldn't just, I want to be Christian. Okay, great, let's get baptized. Why? Because in this book, they highlight the fact that if you are a Greco-Roman and you based your life off a false story, you're going to have to actually learn a new story. You're going to actually have to learn the true story. Because think about this. If you're a Greco-Roman, maybe you were even like believed in God or the gods. Describe them. What were they like? You have Zeus, you have Hera, you have Aphrodite, you have Mercury, Hermes. You have all these different gods. I mean, you guys, you read Percy Jackson, you guys know this. So, or you read it to your kids. We know this about the gods. Yes, the gods are powerful. Yes, maybe they were strong. Maybe they were beautiful. Maybe they were immortal. The truth is, none of the gods were good. None of the gods were just. The gods don't know your name. The gods do not care about you, much less love you. And so if you were going to pray, if you're a Greco-Roman and you're going to pray to God, you'd only pray to God, the gods or the goddesses, for one of two reasons. One is you were so desperate that you were willing to come before the God and risk being cursed, because that's the thing. They were so fickle, they were just as easily curse you as bless you. But you were so desperate, like you needed the child, you needed the crops, you needed the whatever thing, you needed the victory in battle, that you're willing to risk it and say, okay, I'm going to come before the God or the goddess and risk being cursed or blessed. They're so fickle, you're desperate. Number one, that's one of the reasons why you'd pray. The other reason you'd pray is to keep the God off your back. You do a little preemptive offering and they'll leave you alone. Let's pause on that for a second. How many of us, we're basing our life off of that story? I mean, honestly, how many times have we gotten so desperate that we've been forced to pray? That no, when things are going okay, that's fine, God, you're over there. But no, now I'm so desperate that I'm forced to pray. Or even this, we have this kind of unconscious, subconscious, unspoken deal with God. And the deal is, okay, here's the thing. God, I go to Mass on Sunday, and then I get the rest of the week. It could even be this. And you're like, that's not us. We're supporting Bison Catholic. How about this? God, here's the deal. I go to Mass 6 times a week. I go to 1 Sunday Mass, 5 daily Masses. Let me have the rest of my life. So I go to Mass to keep God out of my life. This is actually not unusual. So if this is you, this is the Greco-Romans. They're coming to faith in Jesus. You're gonna have to rewire how you see God. Now, another thing would be how you see life. The Greco-Roman world, there's no purpose. There's no point to life. It's just the fates. I mean, even Zeus and Hera and Aphrodite and all the rest, they're not in charge. The fates are in charge, and the fates have already written the story. And so it doesn't even matter what you try to do or don't try to do, because your story has been written, so just lean into it. You're a slave, just be a slave. You're sick, just be sick. You're powerless, just be powerless. You're suffering, just suffer. And be a slave without meaning. And be powerless without significance. And suffer with no point to it, because nothing means anything. It's all just up to fate. If you're a Greco-Roman, you'd see God that way, you'd see life that way, and you'd see, what are people? Well, I don't know if you ever know this. Sometimes people say that, the creation stories are all the same. I don't know if you ever heard anyone say this. The creation stories are all the same. Like you have the Roman and the Greco-Roman and the the Babylonian and the Enuma Elish and the Bible stories. They're all the same. They're not. In fact, for those Babylonian creation stories, Roman and Greek creation stories, how the world gets created is one of 2 ways. Either through struggle, like the gods fight each other, and out comes creation, or through sex. When God dominates the other, life comes forth. So human beings are actually created in those other worldviews. Human beings are created just simply to be slaves. So what is a human? The slave of a god, the plaything of a goddess. That's all human beings are. If that's your life, then that means that you haven't been made on purpose. You haven't been made with dignity. Your life has no purpose. Family has no purpose. Friendship has no purpose. Nothing has purpose. In fact, the only choice you have is despair, because the point of life is pleasure or power. And if you have neither, then why not just end it? Realize everyone based their life off this false story for years. And so that we don't get confused and so don't get to think that we're better than anyone else. I believe this is the story that most of us are basing our lives off. This is the story that most of the students who come to NDSU are basing their lives off. This is the story that I don't know about any of the teachers on campus. I don't know any of their stories, but my guess is if they're like other educators, this is the story that they're communicating to our students. Basically, think about this. The modern story of the modern American, when it comes to God, is that God is uninterested in your life. God is uninvolved in your life. And God is irrelevant to your life. We'll say that again. That the story that most people walk around with on a daily basis, that they're basing their life on this false story that God is uninterested in your life, he's uninvolved in your life, and he is irrelevant to your life. Why do I say this? Because years ago, not too long, there was a man named Christian Smith. Christian Smith is a sociologist was out of Chapel Hill in North Carolina. Now he works at Notre Dame. And he did this nationwide survey of American adolescents and their faith lives. And he surveyed people across the board. He surveyed kids who were raised atheists and declared atheism, kids who were raised Jewish, kids who were raised mainline Protestant, evangelical Protestant, Catholic, across the board. He and his team interviewed adolescents across the country, including Minnesota and North Dakota. And what they found, he said, we never expected. What we discovered was that no matter what a kid was raised as, if they're raised atheist, Jewish, Christian, Catholic, they all believed the same thing. And what he called it moralistic therapeutic deism. The heart of those big words is this. Yeah, there's a God, but he's not particularly involved in your life, unless you need him to solve some problem. Think about this. This is the modern view that most adolescents have. Yeah, there's a God. Yeah. And he wants you to be good. But he's not particularly involved in your life. That means the modern view of God is that God is uninterested, that he's uninvolved, and he's basically irrelevant. This is how we see God. Here's a remarkable thing. Christian Smith has a colleague at Notre Dame. I remember hearing this man talk about this phenomenon. I've been reading these books for about 15 to 20 years, just realizing this is that culture that we're living in. People are basing their life on this false story. And this colleague of Christian Smith's at Notre Dame, he said, he'd been wrestling with this as well. And one of the things he said was, he says, I'm wrestling with this because for generations, it was always parents passing on the faith to their kids. And he said, here we are. And all of a sudden, did we just stop? Like, did parents just stop passing on their faith to their kids? Are we living in this completely unique time where parents are trying to pass on their faith to their kids, but their kids are just rejecting it? And he did some more digging and he said, actually, the parents succeeded. What do you mean? He discovered when interviewing those parents, people who are now Gen Xers, boomers, and beyond, they also believed what could be termed moralistic therapeutic deists. Actually, the boomers did pass on their faith to their kids, and their faith was not biblical faith. It was not the gospel of God. It was some other story. Yeah, God's there. He's nice, but he's not particularly involved, interested, or relevant to your life. Now, I had personal experience with this. In the last couple of years, Brian mentioned that I was able to do a podcast where I read through the whole Bible. And super grateful to be able to do that. Incredible. I heard from so many people. I've heard from people who are young who said, this is incredible. I've gone through the Bible. I've also heard from people who have said, I've been going to Mass every day of my life or every Sunday of my life for the last 78 years, 85 years. I'm 92 years old and I just completed the Bible for the first time in my life. And some people are saying, this is amazing. It's incredible. So grateful. One of the commonalities, though, is I had no idea what was in that book. Now, some people are saying, I had no idea what was in that book, and now I know who God is. What they've been doing, 78 years being a Catholic, 78 years of going to Catholic Mass every single Sunday, and they realize, oh my goodness, I've been believing in my own version of God, not in the God of the Bible. I've been basing my life off of a version of God, not off of God as he actually reveals himself in the Bible. And they were relieved, they had experienced a joy of this, I was convicted, okay, I have to open my heart, I have to open my mind and realize that if I'm gonna believe in God, I have to believe in God as he is, not as I thought he was. But just as impactful and tragic were the number of people who wrote to me and said, I'm on day whatever, and I don't know if I can keep going, because this is not the God I prefer. This is not the God I like. They press stop and go back to basing their life on a false story. My version of God. My version of Jesus. Not God as he's revealed himself. And this is the thing, this is the crazy thing. This is in our culture, and that matters, right? Because if I don't actually want to base my life off the true story of who God is, then also I'm basing my life. I mean, think about in our culture right now, so many of us, so many of our young people, so many people on campus are basing their lives on the false story of what life is all about. Well, basically, think about this. Almost any class on campus at NDSU or any other place will basically say, well, life is a cosmic accident. Like it's just a collision of atoms. There's nothing beyond this. There's no mind, there's no beauty, there's no will that created this. It's just an accident. It's a beautiful accident, but it's just an accident. What do you call what you find in your baby's diaper? You might not say a beautiful accident, but it's still just an accident. What happens if you believe that life is just an accident and there is no purpose, there's no meaning to life? Well, I'll tell you what, I got this from you might know a priest named Father John Ricardo. He's a priest out in Detroit. He has a ministry called Acts 29, so incredible. But he cites this, or he pointed me to this article. It was in the Detroit Free Press. It was an article by a guy named Mitch Albom, and it was entitled, "Why is Living Shorter and Dying Sooner the New Trend?" This is the new trend. It's written in 2019. And he said this, Mitch Albom points out that 2018 marked the first time in 100 years when life expectancy declined in America for 3 years in a row. First time in 100 years. Like we would think, like, are you kidding me? 2023, people are living to 120, 130 years old. We're gonna keep going. And yet, for the first time in 100 years, life expectancy in America has declined 3 years in a row. And the primary cause of death is what they termed deaths by despair. And deaths by despair fall into three categories: suicide, cirrhosis of the liver, and opioids. I know that so many of us have been touched. This is rampant. This is everywhere. We know that suicide is everywhere. I don't think there's probably one person in this room whose life hasn't been touched or destroyed by suicide. I don't know if you realize this, but suicide in our country has increased every year for the past 13 consecutive years. There's been a 30% increase, a 40% increase in rural America, which affects us more than anyone. I don't know if you realize this, but for children between the ages of 10 and 14, suicide is the second leading cause of death. Pause on that for a second. From children ages of 10 to 14, suicide in our country is the second leading cause of death. And for our students, the CDC did a survey recently. They discovered that 25% of Americans 18 to 24 years old have seriously considered suicide in the past month. 25%. One out of every 4 18 to 24-year-olds that you're going to meet, that this team, this campus ministry is going to meet on campus in NDSU, 1 out of every 4 has seriously considered suicide in the last month. The cirrhosis of the liver, and it's crazy. I don't know if you know this, but this is most especially affecting ages 25 to 34. This is not those people who are professional drinkers. This is not the lifelong drinkers. This is 25 to 34. And those in this age who die annually from alcohol-related liver cirrhosis has tripled over the last 20 years. COVID, as we know, didn't help. Alcohol consumption increased 30% when COVID restrictions were in place. And of course, opioid addiction. America is 5% of the world population. We consume 80% of the world's opioids. Now pause for a second on this. This isn't just like stats, although they're really interesting and powerful. This is because we're basing our life on a false story. is because our culture is basing how we see the world on a false story. And what essentially the church is saying is there's another way of looking at the world. What St. Paul was saying is there is a true story that you can base your life on. And what's part of the true story? Let's go to the good news. Literally the good news, right? Because if I base my life on a false story, I'm going to be living the bad news. But if I actually hear and believe and base my life on the true story, then there's something about living the good news that is irreplaceable and unmistakable. Number one, you're a Christian living in Thessalonica. And Paul says, actually, here's the good news. True story is God is one. Not a bunch of gods, there's one God. And he's good. Not only is he good, he is just. Not only is he just, he knows your name. And I imagine Paul saying, actually, Jesus once said, the Father has counted every hair on your head, that you matter more to him than, look at the most beautiful thing you can think of. You matter more to him than that. Imagine basing your life on the true story. That God is one, that he's good, that he knows your name and he actually cares about you. He goes on to say, look at Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, the story of creation. And what happens when God creates the world? He doesn't create it through struggle or through sex. He doesn't create it through violence or battle. God just simply declares, let there be light, and there's light. God declares, let there be life, and there's life. God declares, let there be creeping things on the ground, and there's incredible creeping things. He says, let there be dogs, amazing. Let there be cats, like the devil. But then God says, let us make man in our image and likeness. Let us make man in our image and likeness. And then it goes on to say, he did so. Male and female, he created them. What's that mean? Not only that this world is good. Okay, God is good. He made this world good. But he made you and every person you've ever met and every person you will never meet. He made them in his image and likeness, which means that every person, regardless of how strong or weak, regardless of how smart or not smart they are, regardless of how powerful or powerless they are, that every person has worth and dignity. Imagine basing your life on this true story. Imagine basing your life on the gospel of God. Imagine basing your life on this good news. It has power. In fact, actually, that's what scripture says. St. Paul writing to the Romans, he said, the gospel of God is power. This good news of God is power. To base your life on this true story is power. Power to do what? Well, power to change your life. Not only power to change your life, power to change the world. Actually, we live in a world that has been shaped by people who are willing to base their lives on the true story. One example. In the early 19th century in England, there's a man named William Wilberforce. You might know of the man William Wilberforce. He was baptized Methodist, I think, but then I think by the age of 12, he became an atheist. William Wilberforce graduated pretty young from Oxford. He was the youngest person ever to be elected to Parliament in England. At one point, he went on a trip, a vacation to Italy with a friend of his, or just a man that he knew, named Sir Isaac Milner. Sir Isaac Milner was a scientist, and he had the Malthusian chair of science at Oxford University. Brilliant guy. Stephen Hawking had that same position. On the trip, pretty quickly, William Wilberforce learned that Isaac Milner was a Christian. So they had these debates. They traveled for hundreds of hours from England to Italy and back. And by the time William Wilberforce got back to England, he was a Christian. He said, I'm going to base my life on this true story. But he didn't know what to do. He's like, does that mean I should leave Parliament? If I want to base my life on this true story, should I get out of government, get out of politics? He didn't know what to do. And so what he did was he kind of hold himself up and just prayed. He said, God, give me some direction. What do you want me to do with my life? Because I want, just like our students, like when they encounter the Lord, yeah, I was going to be an engineer. Great. What do I do now? be a priest, whatever, you know what I mean? But sometimes the answer is no, be an engineer, but do it differently. So here's William Wilberforce. What do I do? And so out of this prayer, he decided, I'm going to stay in Parliament as long as I can. And I'm going to dedicate my life to two goals. The first goal is the abolition of the European slave trade. The second goal, he called it the reform of manners in England. Now, the first one, we were like, yeah, abolish slavery, yeah. And like the reform of manners, like it's because back in the day, people were not sipping their tea with their pinky out. And he's like, that's gotta stop. No, it's because things were worse than that. In England at this time, child labor was at an all-time high, with kids as young as 4 years old working in factories. In England at the time, alcoholism was rampant. We think it's bad now. But there are actually records of entire sessions of parliament occurring with people just absolutely, all the parliamentarians just blitzed. That we think our entertainment is rough, and it is. But back in the day, at this time, the entertainment was to go to the city square and have what they called bear baiting or bull baiting. Basically, you have a bear in a cage and slowly torture it to death, or a bull in a cage and slowly torture it to death. And if that wasn't good enough, you'd then have public executions, where people just go out because they just want to see someone, they just wanted to see someone die. If that wasn't good enough, you had public autopsies. This was entertainment. In London at this time, it's estimated that 25% of all single women were prostitutes. The average age was 16. So when William Wilberforce says he wanted to dedicate his life to the abolition of the European slave trade and the reform of morals, he had some work to do. But he based his life off this true story. And he did the work. 2 weeks before he died, Parliament voted to abolish slavery in England. This is the power of basing our lives on a true story. And this power is what we're all, the reality is what we're all invited into. This reality also is what is happening at Bison Catholic. This is the last thing quick. William Wilberforce, he based his life off a true story. What's the true story? God is good. That's the gospel. God is good. He made this world good. He made you in his image and likeness. He made you for relationship. God is good and he cares about you. Remember how I said that if you came before the gods, they were fickle and they could just as easily curse you as bless you? Well, there are some people who are so desperate. In fact, there's numerous accounts of these gods of war, whether that be the Babylonian gods of war or Greco-Roman gods of war. If someone was going into battle, they would offer a sacrifice, the biggest sacrifice they could because they want to have victory. But if they didn't think that was enough, what they would do is they would actually go into worship in the temple of Ares or Mars or whoever, and they would slash themselves with their swords. They slash themselves with their daggers. They would bleed just to try to get the god's attention. Just try to get the god to fight for them in battle. And then along comes Paul. And he says, let me tell you a true story. And this true story is that you don't have to fight for God's attention. The true story is you don't have to sacrifice to get God's favor. The true story is when you come before God, you don't have to bleed to get his blessing. The true story is there is a God and he is good. And he knows your name. And he wants to fight for you. That at one point he became just like us. He became as breakable as you and me. He became as vulnerable as you and me. And you don't have to fight for his attention. He's fighting for yours. You don't have to bleed for his blessing. The true story is, at one point in his life, he let them whip him. He let them scourge him. He let them crucify him. And he bled to get your attention. And this is the true story. This is the true story that changed the world. This is the true story that Monsignor and Father get up every single Sunday and every single daily Mass to proclaim. This is the same story. This is the true story that people at Bison Catholic every single day. This is the true story that you're supporting tonight. Crazy thing is this. Too many of our young people are basing their lives off a false story. And tonight you can change all of that. Tonight you can be part of this. Tonight you can make history. As the night that the tide changed at NDSU. As the night that made a difference for this year's senior class. As the night that made a difference for next fall's freshman class. And when those freshmen arrive at NDSU next August, they will show up with all the brokenness that we all have. They'll show up with all the questions that we all have. They'll show up basing their life on a false story, just like we all do. But they'll find their way to St. Paul's. And they'll hear the truth. And their lives will never be the same. Because they will base their lives on a true story. And they'll be able to do that because of you. And what you're doing here tonight. Thank you.